everyone hear me? Good at the back? Super. So first of all, thank you, Darren, so much for your introduction. And actually, it was the very first visiting studio that I'd ever taught before. And it was really a pleasure to have Darren and some really great students from that time at the GSD. So first of all, thank you for your kind introduction. And it's really a pleasure to be back at ASU and in a way to share our built work. I really took Renata's direction in terms of the theme of the lecture, really discussing details. And I wanted to really share the collaborative work of my partner, Howard Sutcliffe, and I. So I wanted to kind of organize the lecture into a kind of early portion where I wanted to really share some of the things that shape our thinking about architecture, and then some of the physical forces, the kind of landscape that shapes our work literally, and then to share 4 projects and to really understand them through 1 to 50 sections, and then a recent project as an afterward. So it has a kind of few pieces, and I like to talk quickly, so I'm just gonna go into it. So first of all, Howard and I live at 43 degrees latitude, so light shapes our architecture. We desperately try to amplify winter light. It's just essential for us. And then we shade ourselves for about 2 months of the year. So we're really sort of this sort of heavy sort of winter, and then summer becomes really sort of overpowering. This is a view from a very early project called the Laneway House. We're also always having to cover up our structure. So this is a seasonal building that we did a while ago, but the idea of being able to expose the structure as opposed to having to build it, insulate it, and cover everything up was really a pleasure for us. We're using glulam frames with metal tie rods to create a kind of hybrid structural condition. We drive our engineers crazy because of the differential of wood to steel, but we really make them work hard, but we love these kind of hybrid conditions. And then the 2x4s down the center really become a light monitor. So you can literally tell the time of day by the shadows on the floor. In a way, here is a really early project, a recent project where we're looking at this kind of diaphanous condition of light. We're really inspired by the black locust trees in this garden, which is part of a remnant ravine, the kind of most northerly limit of the Carolinian forest that actually starts off in North and South Carolina and actually kind of tips up to where we are in Toronto. So it's a kind of experimental project where we started with paper, laser cut paper, MDF, and then ended up with water jet steel. And it's on a project that we've been working on for 30 years. So a kind of ongoing series of experiments for the same client in different ways. The issue of northern light has very particular qualities that we really enjoy manipulating and celebrating. Sometimes I think that we're actually painting with light, and in a way this is the integral house, but this kind of question of light really preoccupies us and is really part of how we think about every project. We also love using water. We like embedding water, whether it's a public project or private project. This is a reflecting pool for a public park. It's called Ledbury Park in Toronto. So this is a reflecting pool that becomes a skating rink in the winter. And what you're seeing is a pavilion for changing your skates, and then the Zamboni garage is the one off to the your left-hand side. In a way, the same project and the idea not only of summer water, but winter water, the kind of using water to animate both public and private spaces. This is really a part of the park that actually is a small outdoor open space, and so the water is actually essential to its kind of publicness and its reading. A residential project where we're really bringing water right into the house almost, and then out to the edge of the Toronto ravine. So using the water element to link the kind of inside and outside. We're actually working with both a naturalized pool with turtles and fish, and then a swimming pool that looks contiguous but is actually separate water systems. This is called the Weathering Steel House. and the same project in the winter. And one of the things for us that's so amazing is we think about water as a landscape. The ability to register subtle shifts in temperature, changes of state from ice to steam to back to water are so eloquently captured with winter water. So it's something that we really try to explore all the time. So winter is a very long season. and in a way, we think about how our buildings look in a snowstorm as much as on a verdant summer day. We actually think of winter as a kind of atmospheric condition that we actually try to register and think about in our work. So in this project, you're seeing fluffy white snow, but you're also seeing Douglas fir, as well as weathering steel. And the kind of combinations and the relationships of the aging, the patina, the kind of role of winter is very much part of how we think about our projects. We often ask our photographers to take shots during winter blizzards. We're very fortunate they still work with us and talk to us. And we actually kind of think about what winter will be like in our work. So it's something that isn't just a kind of season that you avoid, but is actually something that you really want to capture the sublime qualities that go with it. This is a project called the Orchard House on Georgian Bay. We think about what it's like from the outside, but we also imagine and project what it's like from the inside looking out, what it's like at the kitchen sink in the middle of winter in an apple orchard. So it's this kind of inside-outside relationship again that we're always interested in exploring and thinking about. Also, we have an interest really more in the spatial experience of architecture, and we're less interested in the professional boundaries. Landscape architect, interior designer, for us are really irrelevant nomenclatures. And so we actually love thinking about the design of a chair or a lamp or fixtures and fittings, and we see them as just a kind of natural sequence from landscape architecture to other scales that actually are part of the inhabitation and the experiential understanding of projects. You're seeing what we call the hab chair there. We have a metal version and a wooden version, and then on the right-hand side is what we call our bug lamps, which are actually stainless steel. We're actually using off-the-shelf scientific glass. We started off with masonry jars, and so the ready-made and the customized actually working well together. We also love what we call fittings, fixtures, hardware. We work in stainless steel, bronze, metals, and we're constantly experimenting and thinking of ways of working with materials. We often start off with paper, maybe move to clay. We'll do a 3D printout. The printout will get adjusted, altered. The printout might become a casting for a limited batch. And then we've actually been experimenting recently with a lot of 3D prints in bronze with amazing results. So having lots of fun. And we love to experiment and try new things. So we're always trying to capture what we consider the wonder or the delight. This is a kind of organic cast resin element with phosphorescent powder. And it's really meant to allude to fireflies in a jar, things that you do at your summer cottage when you're a kid. And there are bug lamps, which you saw an image of. When you turn the light off, the phosphorescent pieces glow for another 90 minutes. So this kind of idea of it actually having a life when it's off as opposed to when it's on is really part of the delight and exploration that we like to play with all the time. So in a way, I just felt that was important to set the stage of some of the things that really are part of every project that we work on and aren't exclusive to one or other, but are part of a thinking process. And I want to just then introduce the physical environment that really shapes our thinking. So everything that you see in green is actually what's called the Precambrian shield. It's actually the oldest rock in the world. It's considered a stone necklace around Hudson's Bay, which is actually the kind of bay right in the middle. And this Precambrian shield was buried under tons and tons of ice after the last ice age. So you imagine the ice melting and then literally receding and scraping everything in its path. So the kind of pressure of the ice, the kind of solidity of the rock actually shapes the landscape that we work with. And it's important to think about that. This is a view of project we did in Georgian Bay, a prefabricated project. In it, you can see the exposed rugged rock of the Precambrian shield. You can also see the trees that are slightly tilted over. They're actually shaped by the west wind, the kind of coming off of Lake Huron over Georgian Bay. It's actually a mini archipelago, so there are actually 30,000 islands. It's a UNESCO biosphere, and the zone that is actually identified as the biosphere is what they call the littoral. So it's actually the zone between land and water. And that's where all of the amazing ecological kind of treasures are located. So this project is prefab, it's on an island, and you're seeing the landscape. And here's an interior view where we're actually working with structurally insulated panels for the floor, wall, and roof. And these prefabricated pieces aren't just a kind of something you haul up on a trailer and plop onto the site, but it's really a kind of different interpretation of prefab. And it really, the final result really aspires to connect the ancient and the modern. And so we're always playing with kind of these quite seemingly contradictory terms and finding ways for them to coexist. This is a satellite view of the Great Lakes, one of the largest systems of fresh water in the world. It's really a kind of amazing sort of freshwater magnet. So not only are there the Great Lakes, I'm not sure if you can identify them all, Superior, Huron, Michigan. Georgian Bay is actually off of Lake Michigan, so it's considered the sixth Great Lake. Below is Erie and then Lake Ontario, and between Erie and Ontario is Niagara Falls. And so in a way, Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, Cleveland, all are kind of Great Lake metropolises. They've had different kind of highs and lows, but really we're very much situated in this kind of huge body of fresh water in the middle of North America. A very early project that we did is really on one of these freshwater lakes that feeds the Great Lakes, and it's really an essay in kind of things on the water. They're underwater cribs that are made of hemlock. They have to wait till the ice freezes. They use chainsaws. They cut holes in the ice. They drop these towers of heavy timbers to actually create the underwater infrastructure to hold up boathouses, docks, anything that's over the water. So here we're actually working with a boathouse. We're actually combining heavy timbers, which is everything in the gray, with a kind of more modern Douglas fir skin. So again, the kind of ancient and modern, different ways of thinking and using wood that are intertwined. We also think about not only wood, heavy and more refined, but also combining wood and steel. So you're actually seeing a cantilever, but there's actually a steel beam with wood, steel columns clad in wood. So we're always playing with these kind of combinations and really looking at the syntax and language of all these elements. We're actually cantilevering the wood, providing upper level decks, shading for boats, and actually spatially thinking about the interrelationship of all these elements. Howard and I live in Toronto, Canada, and it's really part of what we call the Golden Horseshoe. So if you think about Oshawa, Toronto, Hamilton, Niagara Falls, Rochester, it's a kind of megalopolis, over 7 million people, one of the former manufacturing heart of North America. And in a way, Toronto is one of the key engines within that. So Toronto's a city of 2 million people, and these green lines, the one on the right is the Don River system, and the one on the left is the Humber. And Darren will know this from his field trip to Toronto. At the GSD, everyone goes to really exotic places. They go to India or China. We went to Toronto, which was an hour from Boston, but we had a good time anyhow. But what you're seeing in green is this leftover post-glacial landscape. So these river valleys that define the city. At the bottom is the harbor, and we're on the north shore of Lake Ontario. In 1958, there was a major hurricane, Hurricane Hazel. And so the ravines were actually where they had brickworks, munitions areas, everything that they couldn't fit in the city, they dumped into the ravines. But in a way, this amazing major hurricane, a kind of perfect storm, flooded these river valleys. People lost their lives, houses were destroyed, and it forced the city to rethink its relationship to the ravine, and I think it's still undergoing that. So you have a condition where these ravines provide, there's a kind of 60-foot drop from the urban plateau to the bottom of the ravine, and yet you're in the middle of the city. So these kind of dichotomies of feeling like it's wilderness, but you're proximate to subways is quite an unusual condition. Another view where you're seeing the kind of urban metropolis, insurance companies, banks, towers. In the foreground is actually the subway in a tunnel. And then way down, you'll see lights at the bottom, and those are actually cars that are actually at the bottom of the ravine. So you're seeing this kind of very layered condition. And then a view in winter. So in the bottom, you can see a cross-country skier, the kind of skyline of the city, and you're in the city, but you're also skiing on your cross-country skis. So in a way, the ravine condition is a site that we've actually been fortunate to build on in many ways. A really first project was really linked to an ongoing series of investigations. So imagine your first project has no windows, no doors. The only mechanical system is a pump for a fountain. But in a way, it allowed us to think about a lot of things. Shifting horizon lines, the whole ability to explore materials and their metamorphosis, to think about the atmospheric reaction between materials and the kind of weather conditions around it. Through this very little project, we engaged at the scale of landscape, urban design, furniture, fittings, water, bridges, benches. And so in a way, it became the DNA for a lot of things that we still continue to explore. So in a way, it's a way you can imagine a kind of manifesto from something very small that actually has implications that you continue to question for a long time. This was actually a photograph taken almost 25 years after we built our first project. And maybe it actually is closer to how we imagined it. We actually almost always think about our projects as a ruin. What will it look like after we're long gone, nature's taken over, and maybe if it makes a good ruin, it might make a good project. So in a way, you're thinking about the passage of time, its impact on your work, and the way that built form actually directly engages with nature. And you're not imagining a pristine condition that's perfect, but actually nature and building are actually always in play with each other. On the same site, for the same client, several years later, we're designing a guest house. We never imagined that you could see one pavilion from the other. And in a way, our work is always thinking about the landscape as the found condition, and you're always thinking about how you create a new foreground to something you already know. So in a way, we can't re-describe the landscape. It is actually the found thing. And one of the things about our world that's changing so quickly is that landscape is maybe the only thing that is actually particular and specific. Soil conditions, its geomorphology, the kind of climatic conditions actually create the specifics of a landscape. And architecture is actually becoming more and more generic in a kind of consumer world. So how you play with foreground and background becomes, in effect, an interesting area of manipulation and huge potential. So here's a kind of our foreground to a kind of ravine, kind of remnant ravine, Carolinian forest. Canada is the second largest landmass in the world. So our buildings, no matter how huge we think they are, they're tiny in relation to the kind of physicality of our land. And so in a way, we always have to, as architects, think about how a small building can have a big footprint, not by building more, but by implying and actually claiming maybe a larger territory, but not always by scale or bigness. So you can use retaining walls and decks and many other elements to actually extend the reach of something quite small to actually capture or understand a larger territory. And again, we're always thinking about what things look like from the outside in, but also from the inside out. This kind of ongoing manipulation, and not just a kind of external point of view, but inside and outside, and the kind of interesting play between the two. So while we have our ravines, which are in effect this hidden topography in Toronto, there's also the back alleys. And in a way, I'm always interested in these kind of invisible, visible things. So I've done lots of work on laneways itself. And so we've looked at the kind of back alley systems. I've done lots of work with my students at the University of Toronto. So we began a studio by saying how many kilometers, we're in metric, not imperial. And so how many kilometers of laneways exist in the downtown core? And when we contacted the Public Works Department of the city, they told us they didn't know. So we tried to figure it out. So I can tell you that there are approximately 120 kilometers of laneways in the downtown core. And I think of Toronto as a city with English and American parents. So we have this kind of English system that was laid out by British surveyors. Many of them never came to the colony, so that was a totally abstract exercise. And then we have a kind of very American downtown core, I.M. Pei, Edward Durrell Stone, Mies van der Rohe, and big expressways. So we have this dual parentage. This is a photo taken by a photographer named Arthur Goss at the turn of the century that actually describes this kind of hidden zone, these laneways that were part of a Victorian system laid out by these British surveyors. And you would have had stables, accessory buildings, outhouses would have all been in the laneways of Toronto. So with my students, we've looked at the built form and tried to understand this emerging system and really try to kind of give form and meaning to this kind of leftover piece in the city, because we see it as this enormous potential. And so here we're looking at I lanes and T lanes and Z lanes and reconfiguring a different way of rereading the city through its back alleys, this kind of forgotten leftover system. So in a way, this is a project that we did for ourselves. In a back alley, you can see the pickup trucks and the kind of cars. So we really wanted to coexist, slide something in that could actually have a kind of create a place within this leftover system. A view from inside looking, from outside looking in. So you can see the alignment of garden walls with upper level etched glass. So you actually live in the middle of the city with no curtains. You're thinking about water in the winter as well as the summer, and the kind of way that even a very small garden in the winter has a meaning and a place. And the idea of the kind of changing seasons and the ability to bring the inside out. Maybe this is why Will Bruder and I get along so well, because our house has exposed concrete block. So the next part of what I wanted to share with you is really 4 projects seen in detail, and really speaking directly to the theme of your lecture. And they're really seen in detail at a 1 to 50 section. So in 2015, in conjunction with the last Venice Biennale, we were asked by researchers at the University of Venice and the Polytechnic in Milan to participate in an exhibition that was to be presented at the Biennale. And we were one of 50 international studios that were asked to participate. So there's, Will Aritz and Peter Markley, Herman Czech, Grafton Architects from Dublin, Dominique Perrault, Kenzo Kuma, and we were the only North American architects. It's kind of a slightly odd list. But in a way, the exhibition featured over 200 details. There's actually a really amazing website. It's www.detailsinsection.org. And so what they did is they used the exhibition to create an atlas. And it has, I think, huge potential for education and architectural practice, because it shows and shares all of these large-scale 1 to 50 details. And in a way, the premise of the whole project was to aim this research at demonstrating how insightful a section can be in order to represent the complexity of the architectural artifact. In fact, sections allow for the simultaneous perception of both materiality and form, of building envelope and interior space. So this is a kind of research project, and I think it's really quite interesting. And so these are 2 images of the exhibition in Venice. So in a way, they had panels. It's almost like each panel is like the page of a book. because, and this is the template, so this is Kenzo Kuma's, where we actually were given this template, and you said, you know, here's his projects, but everyone has to follow the same format. So what you're seeing is, in effect, 4 large-scale sections. There's a photo and a really short text for each project, and a text defining your interpretation of the kind of exterior walls of the building. So it's a very simple format, and I think what's interesting is that everyone followed that format, and it actually becomes an amazing index or register of different ways of really putting things together that have very different results architecturally. What I think is also so important about this is that I feel in so many ways we're losing our core discipline of architecture. We're skirting around it in all these ways, and students often don't actually get what architecture is, even when they leave great architecture schools. So I would say for us, the section is fundamental. It's actually kind of like core, and we love doing them and exploring them. And so what I thought would be the best thing is to share the 4 projects that we did, to share them in detail, and to use the section as the vehicle to describe them. So here's our 4 sections. And if you look, we wanted to create thick walls of light that transform our architectural spaces through the seasons and from day to night. So the 4 projects we selected really modulate light in very different ways. But in each case, the thickness of the wall assembly allows for the gradation and the transformation of light as it washes across the surface, while the thickness of the wall is simultaneously about containment and substance. At certain times, it also dematerializes by light. So we're kind of making it sort of like macho and like heavy, and then it sort of dematerializes before your eyes. So in a way, the very far image on your left-hand side is a synagogue, Congregation Bet Am, that we did in Portland, Maine, where we created apertures above with a combination of a skylight and a clear story that wash the light inside the face of what is a sacred space, allowing the space to glow from within. The project on the far right is what we call the Integral House on a Toronto ravine, where we created shaped, thickly articulated wooden fins, in which natural light washes across a wooden surface. In the image on your middle left is the Craven Road Studio, where we created a very narrow skylight combined with an articulated wooden light coffer to amplify the light. And then on the sort of third one from the left is actually what we call the House on Henry's Meadow, where we transformed logs into a conceptual screen, really showing the kind of visual delight and plasticity of these kind of ordinary log walls. So what I'll do is just go through each of the 4 projects. So the House on Henry's Meadow, so what you're looking at is a narrow skylight. So I'm just going to try and show you here. There's a very thin skylight that straddles a kind of wall. And what it does is it washes a sandblasted glass outer wall, and then the logs are actually stacked on the outside. So this main facade of this rural residence has a very direct relationship to the iconic log house, as well as the local tradition. This is actually in the eastern townships of Quebec. So people use wood-burning stoves, and there are enormously long walls of stacked firewood. They just permeate the landscape. And you stack your wood so that it's always ready when you need it, because the wood-burning stove is your principal means of heat. So in a way, these are kind of an iconic form that you see all the way through this very beautiful landscape. So hovering above this, a linear reflecting pool is at the edge of a woodland meadow, is this stacked wood wall. And it's contained and wrapped by a large steel frame. This stacked wood wall appears extremely opaque when viewed during the day, and it transforms into a glowing screen at night. So in a way, conversely, when viewed from the interior, the stacked wood wall is in front of an etched glass plane and creates an abstract image which is changing from day to night and from season to season. So we've actually taken this section at a point where we're actually looking at, there's actually a kind of gap here. There's a window just below this stack wall. So something that's very heavy has a clear story window for the lower level, bringing light into the lower rooms. So it's both heavy and floating at the same time. It's actually full of light, but the light isn't always apparent. So here's a view at the edge of the meadow, and you're actually seeing it in the distance. This was a very low budget house. It's on the west side of Lake Memphremagog in Quebec. And here's a frontal view. So you're actually seeing the kind of clear story, the kind of glimmering at the bottom. There's a reflecting pool, the stacked wood wall, and you're seeing the skylights all the way across the top. And the lake is actually beyond on the other side. And this is a kind of really, what you would literally see in the landscape if you were driving through this countryside. Then a view where you're seeing very low retaining walls. They're all made of slate. Every person that worked on this house lived within 5 miles of the building, so it was very much local trades that we worked with. And at the end of the house, it's actually quite miniature. So we're using exposed cedar, we're using stained wood. You can see the meadow on the left-hand side and the lake on the right-hand side. At the lower level, you're kind of coming through. You can see the clear story windows to the bathrooms, the dark floor of the underside. So it's almost like the heavy wood wraps around and it's almost like a house within a house. And then here you are looking out of the lower level clear story across the reflecting pool at the low slate walls, and then the meadow beyond, and then the forest beyond that. And here's a view looking at the light coffers, bringing light down to the lower level. There's a kind of very simple plan. There's a kitchen, fireplace, and you can see these light coffers. So again, the skylight illuminates these upper level light coffers. And here you can see the kind of impact of the etched glass with the kind of stacked wood walls beyond. And actually that's a wood version of our hab chair. So you saw the metal version and that's the wood. Then a view from the dining room, which is an alcove looking out over Lake Memphremagog. You can see the topography going down the slope to the lake, which is not apparent when viewed from the other side. And this kind of condition of this abstracted log wall, the client for this project is an Islamic scholar, so it was almost like a screen that was created. And then the view at night, where the kind of log wall transforms, and what was very opaque is actually more translucent, and then the entire thing levitates and floats above the ground. So the next project is a tiny project. It's actually, we applied for a permit for a garage, even though our client doesn't drive. The reason we did that was if we had said it was a studio, it would have to meet side yard and rear yard setbacks. It would be an accessory building. You'd have to apply for a site-specific bylaw. But if you apply for a permit for a garage and you can show a car in your plan, it gets passed, and nobody says anything. So it's just something to think about. And then you can see the Craven Road house, which we designed a while ago, about 20 years ago, and we added a studio to the site itself. So in a way, we have two houses or two buildings on two separate properties that are now joined. Our client is an architect who's now an archivist. So this is the house we did years ago. It was a plywood box. It was built for $100,000 in 1995. It was using marine plywood as well as horizontal wood siding, and it was 1,100 square feet. And it was a kind of amazing. This project has been published everywhere, and it was really kind of something we never. It was an urban infill project, low budget, and at the time this was not really the right thing to do. This is the upper level, which was a working reference library, 12 feet high. And the lower level is actually 7'6", So we wanted to create as much contrast between the lower level and the upper level as possible to really create a kind of spatial experience. And then the detail of the studio itself, it's a single room studio. It's like a large one-car garage. There's a plaster ceiling that hovers over the space that supports a series of wooden light coffers. Each wall of the studio has a different thickness. There's a narrow, continuous skylight that traces the outer edge of all four sides of the building, and then a birch plywood light coffer that really illuminates the space. So what you can see is in plan is this kind of teeny tiny skylight, the wooden light coffer, and then a kind of band of 8 feet high that actually is the display area. There's one single window that looks out to a courtyard and connects the inside and outside for the space. And then there's a green roof on top. So here's a view from the outside in the winter. This was built for $75,000 with the green roof. And then a view from the inside looking out. So you can see the ceiling, and what you're looking at is the thinnest wall here and the thickest wall here. So what happens is the wall on the property line, which is this side, is actually south facing, and you're really trying to shield the light, and so we're using each thickness to actually create a different light condition and also work with different programs. So this wall is actually all about display. This is the entry wall, so we actually had to show a car being able to go into the space itself. We have the drawings. So here's the south wall and the display. And then the wall to the end is actually part of the working reference library, so it's actually really thick. Our client has every single copy of the Canadian Architect, Royal Architectural Institute of Canada Journal. He actually has the largest architectural poster collection in the world, so you're seeing some of the elements of that. So you're seeing the thinnest, the medium, the next big thinnest, and then the final one is the thickest. So here you're seeing a slightly thicker wall, so it actually has some storage, display, and on the outside it contains spaces for wheelbarrows, garden, things for gardening. And here you're seeing the impact of this small, thin skylight and the way it amplifies light in the space. A view at night. And then here you can see the top of the skylight. We actually used a low E glass, so it brought in really clear light, and then the relationship of the house that we did, and then the studio. And then what happened was here you're seeing a section of the studio and the way that different light conditions apply. You're actually seeing the south light and then the northern light here. And what happened is we were, at the time, designing a synagogue in Portland, Maine. And what happened was originally the section of the synagogue was actually a flat roof. And we in our studio, we actually like doing things at different scales. So we'll do something teeny tiny like the studio, and then we're working on other projects. Some of the larger projects take 5 years, 6 years, 7 years to realize, whereas something that's small can actually be designed, built, especially if it's a garage and you don't have any permit issues, and becomes a tool for experimentation. And you see the results, and I think it's really satisfying. So what happened is we originally designed the synagogue and this Craven Road studio at the same time. The synagogue had to go into a 2-year fundraising mode, and in the meantime, we actually changed the shape of the roof. And the lessons that we learned from the studio actually helped us to reconceptualize the synagogue, not in terms of square footage or program or location, but actually just in terms of the ability for the actual section to speak about light. And so what you're actually seeing is an asymmetrical section. This is west, and this is east. So again, Portland, Maine is actually not that different in latitude from where we are. And so the west light in a reform service is actually a participant, a player. You actually turn to receive the sunset. And so what you're seeing is the ability for the light to actually enter the space. And the asymmetry is actually about engaging the light and making it a participant in the sacred ceremony. So here's some very early sketches, and this is actually with the flatter ceiling, but really thinking about these light coffers. And then a kind of model that we developed looking at light as the shape ceiling, and we're actually combining a kind of skylight and a clear story together. So the combination with a kind of baffle, a wooden baffle, actually allows you almost to tell the time of day. So we spent a lot of time with this Reformed congregation, and the same group that gathered on Friday night also returned on Saturday morning to be part of another service in the same space. So really the people didn't change, the space didn't change, but the light was actually different. So we wanted the light to be a protagonist, a kind of participant. So some early drawings where we're actually thinking about separation and the kind of articulation of these various elements. Here's a view from a public park nearby where you can see a kind of the 1920s Portland Public School, which was actually where they had all their services and religious school. They were bursting at the seams. We created an urban courtyard and a large addition that created the sacred space, and then renovated the existing school building to be their religious school. So here's a view from Westbrook, which is a kind of local street. And what you're looking at is the kind of the library, the rabbi's office, a kind of low building with a sacred space beyond, a courtyard, and then the 1920s Portland Public School. So here's our section. And so we're really looking at this kind of section as part of the sanctuary that's shaped by two canted wood walls that are supported by a curving wood ceiling. The continuous skylight is linked with a clear story window and washes the wooden walls of light, continually registering the time of day and the seasons and giving form to the liturgy through light. On the interior, traditional clapboard wood siding is inverted and turned toward the light to create tiny lines of light as opposed to lines of shadow. This is in direct contrast to the exterior siding where conventional clapboard is used in the normal vernacular way. So in a way, we're trying to give scale and texture to the building facade through these lines of shadow on the outside and lines of light on the inside. Can you imagine the contractors who thought, who are these crazy Canadians? Don't they know how to detail anything? We're using the clapboard upside down on the inside of the building, but once they were in the space, they kind of got it. So here's a view of the sanctuary social hall. We're looking at the kind of doors to the synagogue itself, and then on the right-hand side is the Portland Public School, the old school. And you can see that detail here, and there's a wing that has the kitchen, and the catering comes off the side into the social hall. And then here's a detail where you can see, in effect, both the skylight and the clear story itself. And this is the kind of clapboard. In one case, on the outside, it's actually done the opposite way, the lines of light, because it's an inside wall that continues to be an outside wall. This is the hallway that is the entrance leading you to the sanctuary. And there's a whole garden that we developed with the congregation. This is the library. And then the kind of entry area to the sanctuary. So it allows for gathering and people to meet and connect. And then the sanctuary itself. And so you're actually looking at the kind of main space and the feeling of the space during the evening. And then this is the main space during the day. So you're looking down the length of the space with the small urban courtyard behind you, the shaped ceiling, and the asymmetrical condition. So this is actually the west side, which is deeper and has a more articulated, deeper section from the west side, and then the sanctuary garden at the end. And here inside the sanctuary are these lines of light. So what's happening is the kind of the upper edge of the clapboard is actually catching the light. And depending on the time of day, light comes in front of this baffle or behind the baffle. So again, it becomes a register of time, and you have this other awareness. And here you're getting a sense of the kind of structure We designed custom lights that are asymmetrical, so they shine up, they shine down, and they actually follow the shape of the ceiling. And then a sense of this kind of in the evening where you're getting this kind of condition. So you can see the west condition being more shaped, bringing in the west light and the hallway beyond. And then a view of the Torah, which is actually being illuminated by that west light. So you're actually getting the light raking across the space and natural light washing the Torah. So then the last project is a project for a mathematician who is also a concert violinist. It really has 3 distinct facade systems which are articulated through the building program and respond in different ways to the surrounding landscape. So at the entry level, which is actually this condition right here, there is an undulating wall made of shaped wood fins and custom wood windows that modulate the light and contributes to the kind of acoustical condition of the interior space. The adjacent verdant ravine unfolds in a cinematic way and is viewed through the shaped wooden fins directly linking the inside and outside. The upper floors rely on a regular wooden fin, a more regularized fin that changes in its radii but is actually consistent. And then the top floor has a kind of etched glass outer skin, airspace, and a double glazed sealed unit. So we have 3 different window systems that are operating simultaneously. So in here you can see the 3rd system up here. Then you're looking at a portion of the regularized system and the more articulated system. And it will become a bit more evident as I go through the images. So in a way, the program for this project was volumetric curves. Our client was a calculus professor, so it wasn't just a line on the ground that was a curve, it had to be a volumetric curve. And then it had to be a concert hall for 150 to 200 people, and it had to be architecturally significant. So that was just what we had to do. So here's custom music stands we designed, early sketches that really are trying to think about the shaping of this volumetric condition. A lot of studies looking at the kind of density of the upper fins, which are at your entry level, and then the kind of this issue of syncopation. So we actually conceptualized it as a wooden curtain, allowing you to open up to the Toronto Ravine. The deeper fins are these upper ones, and the upper ones here. And so we wanted to reveal the view, but reveal it as part of the spatial sequence. So these upper fins are actually more customized. They shape your view and orientation, whereas the lower fins are actually the more regularized system. So there are 97 different upper fins, and we're really at a point in time where the ability to actually use computer technology, fabrication, allows us endless possibilities. It allows us a degree of customization that's actually not overly expensive, and I think it's really important that we manipulate and we exploit it and really see what's possible. So here we are. We would actually ship our files to the millwork companies. Then they would, in effect, make all of the molds. There's a lot of back and forth, but the kind of way that we can actually share information is really, really great. Then here you're actually looking at a bit of these 97 different fins. So you can see that they're shaped. The window frame itself is actually embedded in the fins. So what happens is you don't read the assembly. All you read is light and wood. And so what's ironic is that when you see the larger images of the space that appears curvilinear, the only glass that's curvilinear is the exterior etched glass, and there is no curved glass in the main space at all. So there's a kind of irony where it appears curvilinear, but it actually is not curving glass. So here you're actually seeing these deeper fins. What we did is when we actually bid out this portion, we had every company bidding on it produce a fin, 4 totally different fins from exactly the same drawings. It tells you how human construction is and how different people can see the same thing in different ways. Then the more regularized fin. So what you're looking at is a shaped fin and then an épée cap on the exterior with the double glazed unit being sealed and the frame again being concealed. Every fourth fin is asymmetrically loaded as part of the structural frame. So here's a full-size mock-up, and you're seeing the épée cap. The glazing would come in here, and here's the shaped wooden fin. So it's almost both a window system and millwork at the same time. And then here's a view of this regularized fin. So this exists on the top floor, and then the third floor, and the second floor, and the first floor. And then what I wanted to do is to take you through what happens when you have 200 people come to your living room for a concert. So, you know, they have rehearsals before. So this is the new Orford String Quartet practicing the day before the concert. Everyone's in their shorts. They're just hanging out. And you're seeing, in effect, the kind of more regularized fin viewed here. And then this is actually the upper, this is the kind of upper portion where you have a shaped etch glass. There's an airspace and then a double glazed sealed unit. And in the airspace are LED lights. So at night it's very liquid and quite ethereal. Here you're actually seeing the beginning of the customized deeper fin at the 400 level. So you're seeing it from the outside, and then you'll see the impact of it on the inside. So here's the kind of meet and greet. So this is actually a collage of different events that have taken place in the space, but to give you a sense of what happens when, you know, that many people come out to hang out. So what's amazing is the musicians are typically not on a stage. You see them sweating, you see them tapping their feet, you see them turning the pages, and it is a very different experience than a kind of concert hall where they're on a stage. And in a way, most chamber music started off in the salon or people's living rooms. So, and our client has always done musical events in every house he's had. He just wanted to make it, to do them at a larger scale. So here you can see the deeper fins up above and the more regularized fins down below. And there have been all kinds of events. This is the local Boys and Girls Club. This is Philip Glass, a totally amazing concert in the space. This is the St. Lawrence String Quartet. This is Steve Reich playing with a group called Nexus Percussionists. Contemporary dance. This is the Simon Bolivar Orchestra, selected musicians. This is a group called El Sistema who operate from Venezuela. So there was Dr. Abreu who started this amazing program of bringing children out of poverty through music. Cabaret. This is the new, the Aldenburg Connection, so voice and piano. So here again, you can see the kind of deeper upper fins and the more regularized lower fins. And then sections where you can start to see the relationship between the performance space, the topography of the ravine. This section line would probably continue way down here to be at the bottom of the ravine. The cross section where you can see the kind of entry level being up here and the performance space being one full floor below the street level. And then plans where we're going from the lowest level where there's a swimming pool and terraces. This is a level with the study and gallery. This is the lower level of the performance space. This is the upper level where the living room and dining room act as balconies, the kitchen. And then, in a way, what I wanted to do is show it to you as a private house. So in a way, you're seeing, 200 people coming for a concert, but it's also a kind of domestic space. So here we are looking at the river valley that I've been describing in Toronto, and you can see the CN Tower, I think, right here, which is our iconic revolving restaurant. This is the brickworks that really created much of the bricks that built the city of Toronto. And the house itself is right here. So here we are looking at it across the ravine in February. So you can see it really as part of the topography. And then a view looking at both the kind of etched glass window system, the deeper fins, and then as it drops down, you get the more regularized fins below that. This is the entrance, and we developed custom benches made of industrial felt and steel. Kind of entry area. So the material palette is limestone, white oak, leather, and bronze, and concrete. So these are poured elements. So there's multiple chimneys and flues in this stack. There's an elevator, and then there's a blue glass stair. So there are 3 poured-in-place concrete elements. This is the dining room area. We designed a custom table with LED lights that shine up, bronze inlay. The kitchen. And we developed a kind of modified version of our bug lamps. And this is a glimpse of a blue glass stair. This is the kind of one of the upper level living rooms acting as a kind of upper balcony. A view from the top of the stair coming down. And we're working with bronze, again, and leather, and stainless steel mesh. In a way, Toronto is very much an immigrant culture. And I would say only in the last 40 years of immigration, and we've been really beneficiaries of these different amazingly skilled people. Trades from Trinidad, Italy, Poland, really being able to produce pretty remarkable things. And then again, the way that the landscape becomes a participant. Every season is totally different, and you experience the space in different ways. This is looking back to the kind of entrance and the kitchen and dining room beyond. And then we were able to develop cast bronze balustrades and work with kind of really great materials. Custom lights. A lot of CNC work being able to be done literally at the quarries or into the factories to provide concave and convex shaped pieces. And this kind of study level where you're really part of the landscape. And then finally the lowest level, which is the pool level. There's a 35-foot long window that literally drops into the ground to create a fully outside condition. And then our client asked us to work with a glass artist. He wanted an integrated glass piece. So in the end, it ended up being a collaboration between Mimi Gelman, who is an artist, our structural engineer, Dave Bowick, and ourselves. So we really worked together to create, in effect, a kind of blue glass stair. So you're looking at, in effect, hand-blown blue glass, a series of shingles. There's glass treads that bring light to a lower stair, and a huge skylight over the space. So you're looking at a concrete wall, a kind of etched glass lay light, and then the glass shingles on either side. And there's shaped curved glass. And here you can see the back side where there are a series of bronze clips that almost look like musical notes, and then stainless steel cables that hold the whole piece together. So in a way, for us, this kind of exploration of these walls of light is actually really important because we're constantly experimenting and exploring the possibilities of light and its amplification as well as its dematerialization into space. We're interested in the intense relationship between the man-made materials that are controlled and shaped and how they react with light conditions that are largely unpredictable and part of nature. Our work is engaged by this ongoing dynamic, the intertwining of wood and light. Through the intertwining of wood and light, we more accurately register the subtle and changing atmospheric conditions around us. By wrapping our buildings in walls of light, we link the inside and outside, making us aware of our human condition on a daily basis. So in a way, I just thought it was good to sort of recap the kind of thickness and how in small houses, in a small studio, or in larger projects, you can actually think about these questions. They have relationships to each other, but there's no one solution to how these things can be done. So while the integral house was under construction, we were working with a group of Catholic nuns to design a kind of, they don't want to call it a monastery. It's not quite a mother house because it doesn't have certain functions in it, but it was a home. And so what happened was they saw the integral house under construction and it shaped the way they thought about the possibilities. So across the ravine, you can actually at certain times of the year see one project from another. And I think, Darren, you probably did a project somewhere in between here. So the project consists of the restoration of an 1850s house, a kind of undulating building that has a double loaded core, 2 single loaded wings. It's a private hospital, assisted living, chapel. It's over 100,000 square feet. And one of the things the sisters wanted was a kind of for it to be as environmentally sustainable as possible. So we have geothermal heating and cooling. We have a very sophisticated envelope. We told them that the best way they could spend their money environmentally was to build the best envelope they could afford. And anything else they did after that was great, but the envelope is what would benefit you every single day. So we worked with a German company called Rauschmann. We developed a custom curtain wall with them. It was tested in factories in Germany under huge atmospheric conditions, huge reports, and made minor adjustments before it went into production. We have PV panels, solar hot water preheat, many, many elements, but they're all integrated into a holistic approach to the site. We're sitting at the edge of a ravine condition and then part of a residential neighborhood. So in a way, you can see the kind of green elements that we were able to achieve in an integrated way in the project. And I'll just go through some plans. So this is the lower level. There's a large congregational meeting room. There's the basement of the 1858 house, services below, and meeting rooms. The main floor, so this kind of organic piece, is the main entry canopy where you enter, and the first thing you see is the ravine beyond, a very thin program. The ground floor of the 1850s house is fully restored. It had been part of a large nursing home complex, so you couldn't tell where the house started or ended. It was just a kind of a 1940s, 20s building added on. So all of those were removed except for what we consider the kind of heritage piece. And then you can see a series of sisters' rooms. So you can see the single loaded corridor, double loaded corridor, and single loaded corridor. This is the second floor. And then the third floor above that, so you can see the green roof of the chapel. And then the fourth floor beyond that. And then the section where we're actually going, cutting through the building and then the chapel. The chapel sits in a reflecting pool, and then there's the ravine condition beyond. Here's another section where we're looking in elevation at the chapel and a cross section through the building. So you can see how thin it is. So it can actually really literally get cross ventilation. So here's a view of the Taylor house. When we first started, the sisters asked us if we could move the house. They said it didn't really mean that much to them. And we took us about a year to convince them that we could keep the house and get them the program that they wanted. And now they love the house and they feel that it was a good thing to do, but it took a while to convince them. You're seeing the kind of cantilevered entrance and the kind of 4-story building. And here's a view frontally. And so you're actually looking at powder-coated aluminum and weathering steel that are combined. And these are all windows and a facade that has a single loaded corridor behind it, sisters' rooms, and then the ravine beyond that. So here you can start to see the section where you're reading a kind of shaped combination of the weathering steel and the powder-coated aluminum. And in many cases, it acts as a sunshade as you move around the building. Here's another reflecting pool on the other side of the building. And here you can see the kind of system that they developed. A view of the canopy. We developed a custom column. We call it our peanut column because it's a kind of biomorphic shape. And we used plexiglass liners for the formwork. And a view of the residential neighborhoods, 1940s walk-up apartment buildings. And you can see the kind of upper structure that allows the canopy to be so thin. And then a view of the lobby. You can see the peanut columns next to the regular columns. And in a way, one of the things we did was we decided not to do glazing coming to the ground. We created an upstand and put a wooden bench on it. And so all the way along all the corridors are wooden benches. And in a way, for the sisters whose mean age is now about 82, it allows them to meet, engage, rest. And they really have shared with us that it's actually one of the best things about the project, that in a way you don't need to sit in a chair, but you're actually just built into the architecture is the ability to pause. So you're seeing the neighborhood, the thin lobby, the reflecting pool, and then the edge of the chapel itself. This is one of the double-loaded corridors in the core of the building that typically has most of the nursing support for the sisters. And then this is one of the single-loaded corridors. So you can see the thickness of the wall itself, the rhythm, the syncopation. We wanted it to be connected to the neighborhood, but we didn't want it to be fully exposed. What you're seeing is the underside of the structural slab and then a kind of a shelf where all of the circuiting and the wiring and is actually all just exposed up there, and it's easy to get to and they can make changes. The inner wall is actually lined in white oak so that it actually glows from the inside out. And here you can see a kind of diagrammatic section of the kind of cross ventilation. So every third window is operable, and every sister has a door and a window to their room, and then operable windows on the ravine side. So really, it allows for a lot of cross ventilation. So here are 2 different windows to 2 different rooms. Every room has a heat pump, and so one of the things we found out was that the difference between an institution and a home is the ability to control your own environment. And typically in most hospitals, one thermostat controls an entire wing, so you feel like you're helpless. And so we actually developed a situation where every sister's room has a heat pump that controls the heating and cooling. So one person can have air conditioning, the next person can have heating, and someone else can have natural ventilation. All of the heat pumps are actually serviced from the corridor, so no service person has to enter a sister's room at any time. They love closets because they arrived with a trunk, closets were totally an obsession. And so these are really large closets. You can put kind of electric wheelchairs, all kinds of things in them. There's a sitting area, and then a bedroom area, and then a very accessible washroom. We built a full-size mock-up of a room in their previous monastery, and every sister came and gave us feedback, and we made adjustments accordingly. So it really was a working prototype that really met their specific needs. And here's a view in the room. So we actually have no mechanical ducting. So this lower ceiling acts as the ducting, and then you're also seeing the underside of the structural slab. And then here's a view from a sister's room looking out. So you can see both the door and a window allowing different degrees of engagement, and then a view of the residential neighborhood. And then the chapel, which is really the heart and soul of the project. So you can see the reflecting pool, the threshold at the entry point. There's an upper level balcony, so infirm sisters can come directly from their hospital room into this upper level. Custom light fixtures, and the kind of main space itself. So it's almost like the outside pushes in and the inside pushes out. And we designed the liturgical furniture, so it was really very much part of viewing the landscape. And here you are looking at the kind of main altar with the reflecting pool around you. And then finally a view from the landscape. So this is a completely restored indigenous landscape with native species. So in a way, I would say in closing, Howard and I have built a body of work that really continues the modernist project. So while addressing the particularities of many conceptual and physical sites that we build in, we're also committed to architecture that really builds an oeuvre. So we actually don't think about any one project as being our total work. There are just many, many experiments that become the larger body of work. And in a way, these projects consist of interrelated ideas. We don't think one size fits all. We don't use a cookie cutter approach to stamping out the same project regardless of site or situation. We think about architecture through the lens of light, through seasons, through water, through materiality. We engage at the scale of landscape, architecture, furniture, fittings, fixtures. And to date, we really have been shaped by the Canadian Shield, the Great Lakes, the urban fabric of back alleys, the kind of verdant ravine conditions. These are many of the sites that we've been able to and been fortunate to build on. Our work is now shifting. We're doing projects in Hong Kong, in Moscow, in Hawaii, but also projects in our own backyard. So we really continue to experiment and probe ideas through our built work. And we're always looking to capture the wonder of architecture, the delight, and just appreciate you letting us share our work. So thank you.